The film industry has been getting more and more successful over the years. Movies and TV shows have improved immensely, making motion pictures more and more popular. But it wasn't always this way. In fact, the animation industry wasn't super big back then. Films weren't great quality and weren't super entertaining, and there were only cartoons. Full-length films weren't a thing. All this changed when Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released. Disney created a new kind of animation, quality animation. It was a major frontier towards not only the film industry, but the art industry too. Snow White was a big risk to take, making it an even bigger frontier. It was filled with music and emotion, and not to mention how realistic the animation was for the time. It opened a new kind of entertainment, making the film industry a lot more popular, leading to the movies and TV shows we have today. Let's start at the beginning. Animation has been around for centuries. The earliest known animation dated back to 30,000 BC. Many artifacts were found that showed early signs of movement, such as pots with pictures along the edges showing movement, such as this one. Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man is another example. The drawing showed many different angles which implied movement. Some early animation devices were the phenakistoscope, zoetrope, and flipbook. These animation devices didn't make much of a difference towards animation, but they helped evolve into the silent era. The silent era took place from around 1900 to 1930. It featured many films using different types of animation. Some popular films that took place were Gertie the Dinosaur, Felix the Cat, and Steamboat Willie. In 1906, the first entirely animated film was released. Humorous Phases of Funny Faces by J. Stewart Blackton was made by using drawings and a type of animation called stop motion, which takes pictures of individual drawings, and when put together, it made movement. Unfortunately, animation and film productions weren't considered popular. All of this changed when Walt Disney wanted to explore the full potential of a film. In 1916, Walt saw a version of Snow White on a silent film, which was what inspired him more than a decade later. One night in 1934, Walt invited some of his most skilled artists for dinner.
He gave us 50 cents a piece, which was a lot of money, the equivalent of at least $10 now, to have a nice dinner and to come back to the studio where he related by himself the whole Snow White story. He acted all the parts. He even indicated the songs. He had the characters. Everything in this Snow White picture was completely developed in his own mind. We were also steamed up and so enthused for this project that it didn't really cross our minds to doubt that it could be done. In other words, if Walt felt that we could do it, we better find a way to do it.
Disney wanted to make this film as realistic as possible. One example of this was when Walt wanted to make the background more realistic. For instance, if you would zoom in on a scene, some objects, like the moon, realistically wouldn't grow larger. However, animation at the time did not look like this. When zooming in on the scene, the moon, in this example, would also grow larger, which isn't realistically what would happen. In order to fix this problem, the celluloids would have to be divided up into layers. In 1937, the multiplane camera was invented. The multiplane camera was placed on top of a shelf-like structure. This structure consisted of several layers that could move closer or further away from the camera. The Silly Symphony, The Old Mill, was created so they could try out the multiplane camera. This invention made the film look so much more realistic, and is why animation now is better quality. Although their background animation was going smoothly, some other things were not. Because their studios had come up with so many new ideas and made so many changes, the estimated cost of the film was always changing, and there wasn't a definite budget. This was also during the time of the Great Depression, so money was scarce. Disney was taking a big risk. If this feature film was not successful, Walt would be in a lot of debt, which wouldn't do him any good. Another challenge that came up was making the characters look more realistic. At the time, Disney Studios didn't animate people often. One of the only cartoons they made that featured a human was the Goddess of Spring. However, this animation wasn't super realistic. Her movement was too smooth and rubbery. Her facial expressions and features looked very different from the real world. In order to improve the animation, they practiced drawing dwarfs and witches in their silly symphonies. Little by little, their animation improved. Disney's main goal for the film was to make it as realistic as possible. So this means that not only the drawings had to be realistic, but the sound as well. In order to make that possible, there was music added to it. Carl Stalling came up with the process of recording music. He said, The thought struck me that if each member of the orchestra had a steady beat in his ear from a telephone receiver, this would solve the problem. I had exposure sheets for the films with the picture broken down frame by frame, sort of like a script, and 12 of the film frames went through the projector in half a second. That gave us a beat. There was background music throughout the whole film. The longest amount of musical silence lasted only about 27 seconds. The type of background music they used was called sonic ambience. Bloomsbury Collections has a quote from Rebecca Coyle. She says, "Spectator's first glimpse of Snow White is her action integrated with the music while she is wiping the floor. She's not singing, and neither should she be aware of the musical presence in the background. She is aware of the natural sonic ambience. In this moment, Snow White is reacting naturally to the music in the background by humming along with it, as if music is the sound of air. Background music was only half of it. Composing the songs was just as difficult. They created 25 songs, but only 5 were used." Frank Churchill contributed immensely to the song production. Unfortunately, he had to quit because of personal problems. Leigh Hairline took his place. On December 21st, 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered. It cost about $1,488,000 and was made up of 2 million individual cells and ran for about 83 minutes. Once the film was finished, it received a standing ovation. Roanoke Rapids Herald said, "Romance, high comedy, pathos, excitement, color, breathtaking beauty, and tuneful music. Mix them well, and you will have Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, combining every element with spells entertainment. The feature brings to life the beloved Grimm's fairy tale, known in almost every land the world over." The film was released to the public in February. It quickly grossed around $8 million, which is very surprising considering how many children went, and the price of children's tickets were cheaper. The soundtrack of Snow White was very successful as well, becoming one of the top 10 single hits in February 1938. The film became very popular. Characters in Snow White would be on posters and flyers, and merchandise was made as well. On February 23, 1939, Disney received an Oscar for Snow White. The trophy was presented by Shirley Temple, and it had 7 little Oscars representing the 7 dwarfs.
"I'm sure the boys and girls in the whole world are going to be very happy when they find out that the daddy of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Ferdinand, Mickey Mouse, and all the others, is going to get this beautiful statue. Isn't it bright and shiny?
Oh, it's beautiful.
Aren't you proud of it, Mr. Disney?"
Well, I'm so proud, I think I'll bust.
Following Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which took place in the Golden Age, was the American television era, which took place around 1960 to the 1980s. Snow White made the animation industry more popular. Many families around the world were now watching cartoons and films a lot more. Animation became more realistic. The characters were more clear, and the shows and cartoons were more entertaining ever since Snow White was released. Following the American television era was the modern American era. This featured many CGI films. CGI, computer-generated imagery, was one of the biggest improvements in animation. CGI is similar to stop motion, but instead it uses digital designs instead of drawings on paper that weren't moldable. The first CGI animated film was Pixar's Toy Story, which was another frontier in animation history. CGI has become the most popular form of animation, and it all started with Snow White. Others disagree about how the animation era that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs introduced has had a negative effect on children. Initially, films and cartoons were a strong source of entertainment, but then the Disney company made it more popular. They introduced a new era that changed entertainment forever, which critics say is a bad thing because nowadays, children are constantly on devices. FunChildhood.com says, "The analysis shows that most children are psychologically affected by cartoons. Watching cartoons changes children's behavior, which can become aggressive and can also change their language, and language is the most important part of any culture." However, this is not true. It's not about the cartoons itself, but the management and control the parental guardians have over devices. In conclusion, the film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was an important frontier that changed the animation industry forever. Before this film, animation was unrealistic and wasn't a great source of entertainment, but Snow White opened up a new frontier in animation and film, which helped create other innovations for art and animation. It also brought joy into people's lives during the Great Depression. And although compared to today's animation, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs isn't super realistic, it was an important frontier that changed art and animation that's still continuing to improve today.